We appreciate you spending part of your morning with Minnesota Live. In the United States, overall divorce rates are down, except in one key demographic, that is people over 50.
This is a trend that is called gray divorce. And since the 1990s, divorce rates have doubled for people in this particular age group.
So when you're closer to retirement and you need to divide assets, there are some things to consider. Joining us is Caitlin Andren, a partner at Turzich and Ort. Caitlin, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, what's great? Tell us about gray divorce. What's going on with this?
Yeah, so gray divorce, the trend with people who are either at or nearing retirement, starting to decide they're going to separate and split up, and it just adds a different conversation to how that looks because of the position that they're at in life with their assets. Whereas we're not dividing retirement assets and things that they've been saving during the marriage, it's now some of those might be in payout status, and so figuring out, do we treat that as income, do we treat that as assets, and making sure we're not double counting things.
Yeah, so how does that work? Like if I have a 401k and my husband has a pension and divorce is in our future, how does that work as far as that goes?
Yeah, so in Minnesota, it's an equitable division state, and so the law generally presumes that all of your assets are marital, meaning whether it's in your name or in your spouse's name, you're both entitled to it. And so equitable doesn't necessarily mean equal, but generally that's what the courts tend to do. And so we got to figure out, okay, is this a pre-tax retirement versus your checking account? And we don't want to give one to one party and one to the other, because even if they have the same balance, one of them's pre-tax. So we got to take all of that into consideration and figure out what's an equitable way to divide those marital assets between the parties.
So I'm just thinking to the way it is pre-gray divorce or whatever, not even thinking in gray. The person who's making the most money in the relationship usually ends up having to sort of be the one that helps to support the one that doesn't make as much money, right? That's kind of how that works.
Spousal support?
Yeah.
So spousal maintenance isn't necessarily guaranteed in a case. If there's a person who was the primary income earner or breadwinner during the marriage, the other person could say, hey, I'm making a request for spousal maintenance, but they'd have the burden of proving they don't have sufficient income or assets to support themselves and that they're in need of spousal maintenance. But again, with the gray divorce, it makes it a little bit more of a nuanced conversation, because if you're in retirement at that point, well, the law also looks to then, there's not an expectation that you'd continue to grow and save for retirement. At that point, you have retirement assets that you have been saving that you need to then use in retirement to support yourselves. So it makes it a little bit different of a conversation.
There's something here called marital property and non-marital property. What is that?
Yeah. So again, the law presumes that all assets are marital, but somebody could make a non-marital claim. So for example, if you had a 401k started before you got married, and then you continued contributing to that 401k during the marriage, the law is going to look at that 401k and presume the entire thing is marital, meaning both spouses are entitled to it. But the person who had it prior to the marriage could say, I'm making a non-marital claim, and a portion of this is my non-marital asset that I had before we got married, and only the marital portion should be split up.
Okay, so like if you have something in your name, if my car is in my name, that doesn't mean it's a non-marital asset. It just means it's in my name, and both of us would have to, it would be 50-50 kind of a thing, or you'd have to figure that out in the divorce.
Right.
Okay, versus a 401k that you came into the marriage with would be non-marital.
Potentially part of it.
Yeah, gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's why you hire an attorney, I imagine, to help work all this stuff out, right? Because we're not expected to know all this.
Exactly, yeah, because in Minnesota too, generally speaking, property division is final. So if you didn't fully understand what you were agreeing to at the time of the divorce, if you were like, oh, I need to come back and change that, you're probably going to most likely be out of luck. So it's important to talk to an attorney early on and get advice and know your options so that you can make informed decisions about how you want to move forward, so you're not stuck with a bad deal.
What's the difference between mediation and litigation?
Yeah, so litigation is going through the court system, and in Minnesota, the law requires people to participate in alternative dispute resolution, which mediation is a form of that. There's a lot of benefits to mediation because generally speaking, you're going to be able to have a say in the outcome if you're able to reach an agreement through mediation. It's going to be more cost effective than litigating through the court system, and usually you're able to resolve matters more efficiently and quicker. So mediation is just meeting with a neutral to talk through the different issues to see if you and your spouse to come to agreements, rather than litigation where you're going to trial and the judge is making decisions in your case.
Why does the state of Minnesota require that? Do all states require mitigation before litigation?
I can only speak to Minnesota. I imagine most other states have similar requirements.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is an exception for cases where there's domestic abuse, then that mediation requirement is waived. But the courts recognize that people know their situations and their lives better than the judge who's a stranger, and so they really encourage people to try to come to the table and figure out something that's going to be best for them, because ultimately it's your lives and your money and your assets, and so they want to, if you can reach an agreement and figure it out yourselves, they're really going to encourage that.
So when you get divorced and you're younger and you have kids and you kind of work out this whole schedule, and if you're sharing custody and whatnot, and like, well, you're going to have Thanksgiving, you're going to have Christmas, how does that work in this particular scenario?
Yeah, so with gray divorce, I mean, you probably don't have minor children at that point, so it's really just the cash flow, spousal maintenance, and property division that we're dealing with. We don't have to deal with like custody or parenting time or child support or holidays, but it is something to keep in mind, because ultimately if you have adult children or grandchildren together, there's going to be birthdays, there's going to be holidays or graduations or weddings or other life events where you may still have to see and interact with your ex. And so to the extent that you guys can maintain a healthy relationship, or at least coexist together so that you can be in those same environments with your adult children and grandchildren, that's going to be better.
But you can't like work in your divorce proceedings. You can't go, nope, I get Christmas.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't
we don't
work that
do
way?
that. No,
Okay.
yeah.
Caitlin, do you have any tips for people to think about if they're in this situation where they're kind of in this like 50 to 65 or older age range and thinking about this, things that maybe you recognize that people don't think about?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of if you have a financial advisor that you share with your spouse, I would suggest maybe looking at a different financial advisor, just so there's not a conflict of interest moving forward, and you can make sure you're taking into consideration what your property asset is going to look like once the divorce is done, and what you need to do moving forward in terms of budgeting and financial planning to continue to protect yourself for the future. And then also, talking to a tax professional too, just because we're not tax professionals, we're attorneys that practice family law, and so making sure you get tax advice to understand any tax consequences that might be associated with your property settlement before you sign off on it, so that you don't, again, leave with this agreement and then realize that, there's some of this money should be set aside for taxes.
All right. So good advice, good tips. Caitlin, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for having me.
If you would like to connect with Caitlin and the team at Terzic and Ort, you can head to minnesotalive.com.